Olá pessoal, eu sou o Guilhermo, curador do Cineclube Mimese da Universidade de Mogi das Cruzes, e hoje a gente vem com mais uma entrevista super especial, que é com a diretora e produtora Ekwa Msangi. Ela dirigiu este belíssimo filme que está com exclusividade lá no MUBI, do qual a gente já falou inclusive em outro vídeo, no Mimese Indica número 4, que é o Farewell Amor, um filme sobre imigração, sobre dança, sobre trajetórias diferentes, sobre separação, e sobre afeto familiar também, principalmente. É um filme muito bonito, extremamente bem realizado, como eu falei nesse vídeo do Indica, e agora a gente conversou com a diretora, foi extremamente simpática, extremamente esclarecedora sobre vários pontos da produção do filme e também sobre o curta que ela realizou anteriormente, que também você pode conferir com exclusividade no MUBI, que é o Farewell, Meu Amor. O nome é bastante semelhante. Eu acho que até que é uma experiência interessante você assistir ao curta depois de ver o longa. Eu acho que ele complementa de um jeito muito interessante. No enredo, na narrativa, ele ocorre antes, mas assistir depois também vale muito a pena. E ela conta inclusive sobre a finalidade, da produção desse curta-metragem para chegar no Farewell Amor, que tem feito bastante sucesso, né? Estava aqui na Mostra Internacional de São Paulo também. E a gente conversou sobre tudo que envolve a produção e o filme em si. Falamos, né, do cinema que ela gosta de fazer e também, por exemplo, da Joali, né, que é a irmã do Spike Lee, uma grande atriz, já fez vários filmes bastante emblemáticos, né, de cinema negro norte-americano, como por exemplo o School Days, que é o que eu menciono, né, que eu li numa entrevista que ela disse que teve um impacto profundo no cinema que ela queria fazer quando ela viu na televisão. Espero que vocês gostem da entrevista e fica aí ligado, depois da entrevista eu também quero contar para vocês sobre o plano de estudantes MUBI e sobre o sorteio que a gente vai fazer agora em fevereiro de 2021 também, tá? Vamos lá. I guess it would be nice to people to know how much work does it take to even before start filming. How do you juggle, because you are a producer also, right? So how do you juggle between producing and being a director, rehearsing, and also in terms of financing and everything that most people are not even aware when watching this on movie or in the cinema?
Yeah, it's a struggle. I'm happy to say that I did not have to do any of it myself. I mean, the directing I did myself, but I had a lot of support, which everybody needs. So in terms of the producing, I had a producing partner who was a very wonderful, a wonderful friend and colleague of mine. We've worked together for many years, and we knew that there would come a time where I would not be able to focus on the producing aspect of things as well, especially for a feature film. I've done that for short films where I was cooking the food and directing the actors at the same time, but it's not possible for feature. So we didn't want that for me. And so, basically starting from pre-production, I stepped away from all of the producing aspects, and she had a producing team working with her. So she was our lead producer, and we had a number of other producers working with her. And then similarly for everything else, I mean, as a director, you make all of the creative decisions. I didn't have to make all of them myself, but I did have the final say, the final cut of what the film would look like, sound like, all of those things. So people gave me their feedback, they gave me their ideas, I asked questions if I needed to, but it was up to me to make the final decision. So there was a lot of support, which was really wonderful and is not um, is not always that easy to get, especially when you are an independent filmmaker and an independent filmmaker working without a whole lot of money, because you can't pay people to do all of these other jobs. You actually have to hope that they love the work, or they love you, or they love you and the work. There's a lot of having to make relationships and make connections with people to get their support. And I've spent many years supporting other people so that, when my time came, I would also be supported. And so it's been a long road.
Nice, nice. And about the rehearsing, because like you probably heard this a lot of times, but the three main actors, they are
Mm,
suburb in the movie.
yeah.
Did you rehearse a lot with them?
Um, we rehearsed a little bit. We had about a week, 2 weeks. But rehearsals was a lot of things because I needed them to do a lot of things. So, for the Walter character and for Sylvia character, they had 2 hours of dance rehearsals every day. And then all of them had 2 hours of dialect coaching every day. None of them are, Portuguese speaking
Mm-hmm.
Angolans at all.
Mm-hmm.
um, and then and then we would meet, and then we have wardrobe fittings, and there was days when we went to visit the location so that they could get an idea of what the locations were and sort of get into, so it encompassed a lot of things. And then they have their own lives too. so
Sure, sure.
so it was a lot. It was really quite a bit that we had to do with them, and so therefore, it was I spent about 2 hours every day with them, or with some combination of them. I didn't want them to work on the script because I felt that I wanted it to be as awkward as possible and as new and, a first time experience, as fresh as possible, because that's the experience that they're having, is that they don't know each other. They're not
Uh-huh.
really sure what to say, and everything is kind of awkward, and all of those kinds of things. So I wanted to sort of preserve that feeling as much as possible. So what we did in our rehearsals is that I had them do sort of improvisational exercises where we did things from the past, phone calls, the first time the visa was rejected, the second time the visa was rejected, when Sylvia started school, the first time she didn't come home on time, whatever it was, like the when Walter had to explain to Linda that, listen, the family, they got the visa and we're going to have to do something here. And, so that they would have that experience in their muscle memory, so that when the time came to have the interaction, the present day interaction, they would have at least that in their history somehow. So that's what we did with them. And they also happen to just be excellent actors. So we did a great job with the casting. I'm so pleased with who we got. And they were able to bring so much of their own, expertise and talent to the table.
Yeah, that it's amazing. I didn't know that. In a way, you try to simulate that 17-year gap to preserve
Yeah.
that. That is very intelligent, really. Love that.
Thank you. It was, a lot of sensory things, because they all also their method of preparation is very different. For example, Untario, who plays Walter, um, and actually the Marcus, who plays the DJ character, are both TV actors. And TV, you get a stack of scripts and
Hmm.
you're supposed to show up tomorrow and know your lines, and that's nobody's talking to you about the backstory and what it felt and what
Yeah.
you were thinking. There is none of that. So, with Entire, it was actually really difficult because he was just like, why are we doing all of this stuff? Shouldn't we just be working on the script? Um, and his way of, rehearsing was just very different. He's used to sort of having to spin it out a lot faster and just be in the motion and make it up or something. And so, so having to learn how to work with him in that way. For as the Zainab, who plays Esther, and for Jamie, who plays Sylvia, they come from a theater background, so they're used to, watching documentaries. So I was able to give them all of that, and for all three of them, I had like music playlists, for example, that I had made for each character. And so I gave them their music playlist. This is what your character would probably listen to. So they would listen to those things. And, so for them, it was really easy. For Zainab and Sylvia, they loved just the pile of work that I gave them.
Hmm.
They were able to make all these notes and do all of these things because that's sort of what works for them. Um, and then bringing all of them together on the set to make a family. And they're wonderful professionals, so they were able to work together as a team really well.
Yeah, no, and then they must have loved, like you said, there is payment, but they certainly must have loved to be able to get that experience as well, and the music,
Yeah.
which is so important, right? To you're telling about the playlists and the scenes, the dance scenes, they are so beautiful. They are like
Thank you.
they are so much. There's so much love in there. We can see that, and that is probably this is a result of your work and Bruce Cole as well, right? The DP.
Yeah.
Did you have any
Yes.
kind of did you thought of some kind of different preparation between, because you have the kizumba, which is Walter's, right, and the couple, and you
Yes.
have the kuduro, which is more a teenager thing, and they are
Yeah.
it's totally they are so different. We're talking about the same thing, which is the music, but the
Yeah.
movie makes a statement in there that they are totally different generations, that they are filmed differently.
Yeah.
So how did
Yeah.
you prepare that with Bruce Cole?
Working with Bruce was such a joy. I'm so blessed to have had the opportunity to work with him because he's such an artist. Um, and we spent a lot of time. We didn't have a lot of time to work together, so it required us to also be very, very quick. And I spent a lot of time in the time that we had just discussing what was important to me about the dance, and that to me was sort of like the central theme. I mean, it's literally what inspired the story for me was this couple that used to be a dance couple. They used to have a rhythm together, and now they've fallen apart, and he's developed a rhythm with somebody else, and he's trying to pretend, or they're trying to figure out their steps together over here, but you see him coming alive when he's with his dance partner, Linda. And so that, for me, that's sort of his story for Walter. And so even in terms of the way that we had planned, because we wanted to shoot every character's chapter differently and uniquely to that character. We had talked about a lot of things initially. Maybe we'd paint the background different colors for each person, or and it all pretty much came down to budget. Nobody had the
Uh-huh.
time or money to do that. But so what remained was that we had to work within the camera. Our choices had to come from how we're moving the camera, what kind of lenses we're using, that kind of thing. Maybe what colors we have in the production design, in terms of their wardrobe, or in terms of accent colors or things of that nature. And so for Walter's chapter, if you notice, everything, all of the shots except for the all of his shots are very static. The camera doesn't really move very much. It's on the tripod for the whole time, and he's kind of caught between surfaces, between the door frame or window frame or this and that. He's always sort of like he's caught because it
Mm-hmm.
kind of speaks to what his emotional situation is. And we took influence from a lot of sort of slow cinema and some Japanese cinema and things of that. But I wanted the club to be different because that's where you get to see a different side of him. So that's the only scene in his chapter where the camera is actually moving. Um, and then for Sylvia, because she's young, because she's restless, because of all of these things, I wanted her to be always moving. The camera is handheld for her chapter.
Mm-hmm.
It's always moving and searching, and she's watching everything. And similar for Esther too, it's a little bit more romantic. She's come with this kind of romantic idea of what her life is going to be, and now she's together with her husband. But she's also very observant and sort of looking at who was here and what was here and what's going on and what am I putting in. And so we used a lot of, we changed the lenses for hers, and we used a lot of close shots, so we get a lot of extreme close-ups on like little details of her hands, and she's touching her necklace, and different things like that, which was sort of the language for her chapter. And so trying to use all of those things with dance, and the moments where there's dance, having it feel differently because it's speaking to what they're experiencing on the inside.
Sure, I think the tension is different. Like the tension in the like the battle scene of
Yeah.
Kudur, that is unbelievable, and that is so real. We have
Yeah.
we have a lot of rap battles here in Brazil. We called Batalha de MCs, which is like and people who like it is not something, it can get ugly, like with the rap battle thing. And I thought of that when the tension that grows on on Sylvia's dancing. It's so real. Like you have the antagonism, right? You have your nemesis, and
Yeah.
that is so well thought, really.
After 17 years apart, thank you for bringing us together.
Welcome.
And you were talking about those chapters, which is like, because it's a coincidence that you've talked about this little cinema of Japan. Like it always reminds of Rashomon, of Kurosawa's Rashomon.
Sure.
That was the original idea of the script, to really have a point of view, because that point of view, it has a quality on your movie that I find it so interesting, which is we don't point fingers at those characters, because everyone has a motivation, and you can clearly see these aspects of the movie because of this division in chapters. This came out on editing, or this was the original idea for the script?
No, that's how I wrote it. That's how I wrote the film. That's how I conceived the film, actually, because when I started writing the feature, I had started with a short prequel film that was, a 10-minute story. We were using it as a way of sort of gaining support, a proof of concept in order to raise money for the feature. And in the short, it's the moment before Walter goes to the airport. So it's a short film that's just about him, and Linda comes to drop off the keys, and they're saying goodbye. So when I started writing the feature, his story was sort of the freshest in my mind, but it felt a little stereotypical to make a film about a guy who's having an affair, and what's he gonna do? And we've seen that.
Sure.
Even though it's a different kind of affair, because he actually really wants to do right by his family, but he's truly in love with this woman, and all of those things. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll do it from the daughter's perspective. But the thing with making films about young Black teenagers dancing is that you immediately get put into a certain category of like, oh, it's a dance film. And therefore, the kind of funding, the kind of seriousness, the kind of, it's sort of seen as like a trope, I suppose. So I didn't feel like people would take it seriously as like a cinema type of story. It would be like an MTV kind of story, and I didn't want that. So I was like, okay, well, what happens if I do both of their stories? So initially I wrote it from Sylvia and Walter's perspective, just the two of them. And then about 6 to 8 months into the process, it became really clear that it didn't make sense to not have, like, Esther's story was the linchpin for both of their stories. And without Esther, none of their stories would really make sense. And so I included Esther at the end. And I'm really glad that I did that. And also, as I was working on it, it became so clear to me that even though they're all experiencing this one wonderful event, that they're finally reunited and they're making their life together, everyone has such a different experience of that event, and I didn't want to sacrifice one person's perspective over somebody else's. You know, Walter's perspective, being heartbroken on all of this, is not necessarily the most important perspective that we need to see, because Sylvia is also having this very unique experience of, she's never met this man and she's supposed to love and respect him and all of these things, and like to figure out life in America as a young person, and you know. And then Esther's perspective, who basically put her life on hold, essentially got married to the church, you know, because she was holding on to this dream, and the dream has finally come true, but is it really the dream that she wanted? And is, you know, was this better at the end of the day? And I just thought those were all really unique, and so I wanted to be able to, I was greedy and I wanted to be able to say, show all of them.
But you made it. Congrats. Really, really, really beautiful.
What happened? I can't be your savior, Walter. I need love too.
Just one dance.
Well, for those who don't know, you were inspired by a story from an uncle of yours, right? And so do you feel that did you feel that that religion factor was a very important one? You grew in Kenya, right? So
Yeah,
you
my
probably
family,
seen women like that and men like that for a very long time, right?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my family's from Tanzania. I grew up in Kenya. And as you mentioned, this is inspired by a relationship of an aunt and uncle who were married in the mid 90s. And my uncle got a student visa to come to the US and has been, you know, came intending to bring his family with him, has been petitioning for visas since 1996, I think. And till today, they are still petitioning for visas. Still hopeful that one day it will happen, one day, you know, but in the meantime, it's changed them. It's changed them as a family, it's changed them as individuals, specifically for my aunt, who's become very, very religious. But she's not my only auntie who's religious. There's a lot of them who are. And, you know, across the continent in general, you'll see it's kind of, it's become a little bit normal. There are all of these mega churches that have sprouted up all over the continent, and a lot of them tend to target women, single women, vulnerable women, you know, with the promise of finding a husband, or a husband who has a lot of money, or bringing her husband back if he's been, you know, misbehaving, or, you know, all of these different things, where there's a lot of women and one very charismatic leader, and, you know, and that's a different conversation to be had. But, you know, because I'm not necessarily saying that religion is bad, I don't think it is. I think religion is what she needed in order to get here, and thank goodness for that. But now she's having to confront whether it's still useful in this setup, in this environment, and whether that belief system works. And, you know, so there's how it rubs against Walter and her family in the US, but it's also her neighbor. You know, it's interesting because she sees herself almost like she's an African practitioner, and that is her focus, is on an African religion. And then you have this African woman who's religious, but her focus is on a Western religion. And so they're kind of practicing each other's religions, but they're also able to be allies to each other because they kind of understand it, even though they're kind of skeptical of each other's religion at the same time. So, you know, to me, that was just a little bit funny.
Sure. Yeah. And I must say, I loved, like, when Juali's character and Zinga enters, it's lovely, right? I know she's a master, right? And it happens that I had just been reading a text by Grada Quilomba, which is Plantation Memories, and she describes in lots of details the first time that an unknown woman to her that called her sister in the streets of Germany, I think, and how that made such a change in her. Like, it was really a groundbreaking moment for her. and that is exactly what happens in your future, right? And I found that delicious for me, really, to see that happening in your movie. And then I read an interview. I can't remember the media vehicle. Sorry, that
Okay.
you talk about when you watched School Days, Spike Lee's School Days. So I
Yes.
say, oh my God, that must. Did you happen to be friends with Joie Lees before? Or how did you approach her?
No, I wasn't. And I actually had written that part. I don't know if I wrote it in the script, but we had, for some reason, we had a lot of younger women playing that, when we were doing the auditions. And there was just something that was like, it's kind of funny, but it's not quite what I want. And it was my casting director who was like, it might be useful to have somebody a little bit older. Have you thought of Joie Lee? And I was like, I haven't, but I love Joie Lee.
Who doesn't, right?
Exactly. And I mean, she's so Brooklyn. And so she came for the audition, bless her. And I don't think she expected to get it because, it was kind of written for a younger woman. So she was like, okay, whatever, I'll do that. But she was just so perfect. Because I also thought like, yeah, of course, Esther would regard her in a very different way because they're about the same age, as opposed to if she was like sort of like a young hot thing that lived next door. She might not even trust this woman. But with Joie, it's kind of like they're peers. And Joie she was so great to work with. She was so lovely as a professional. She had about 3 days for her parts, but she really spent a lot of time like making sure she understood the character and like bringing in a lot of her own props and coming up with some of her own like words and slang and different things. Sort of like the timing for her parts was just really wonderful. It was really great. It was so, for me, I was just like in awe of like, oh my God, this person that I grew up watching her movies all these years. And, it's very difficult for me to not like,
yeah, like try to be professional, but
professional and cool.
Yeah, that was, and I think that the Nzinga character has something that I think that comes from your short movie, which is so intelligent that she says so much without telling, right? Like your short movie, The Farewell, Meu Amor,
Yes.
which is like in 10 minutes, you say there is almost no dialogue, right? But
Yeah.
the way it's filmed, it's so telling.
Yeah, thank you.
And Esther tries to get something of her, and she's like in a watershed, right?
Never mind.
Yeah.
Farewell, No More, actually, when I wrote that, because I had won a cash prize for another film, and they needed me to make a short film in a year and present it at this festival. So I didn't have a lot of time, and the budget was very small. And so I was literally like, okay, what's the smallest thing I can do? Just like one location, 2 actors, like 1 day of shooting. I just need to get this thing done. And so I'd initially written it as a silent film. Like there was no dialogue whatsoever. And then there were places where it was like, okay, I actually do need to explain a little, like people were just going to be confused. So I added a little bit of dialogue at the end just so that you know what's happening. But that actually did start as a silent film. So that's why there's as little as possible in it.
Not his fault that we had to wait so many years.
Why didn't he come back home then?
Why are you here?
Just one dance.
We don't know each other anymore.
We lost so many years.
So, what do we do now?
This country is very hard. You always have to carry yourself a certain way. You're the only one who knows what you know and who can do what you do. So be fazer.
This is like a not so typical immigration movie, right?
Yeah.
And do you think so? You have another government, no?
Yeah.
You have the Democrats,
Next
so
week we will.
it can get worse than you had for 4 years, right? Yeah, and you have also Kamala Harris. Do you think that there's a chance maybe your uncle to finally get your own? Do you think
I hope
things
so.
will improve in a
I
way
hope
for
so.
immigrants?
We are certainly very hopeful about the people that we have elected, from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but all the way down in terms of, we have a democratically run Senate and Congress, and how, just all of the people is just like, oh, get it together. And, I think we're at a time now, after having gone through 2020 and the pandemic and all of the things, where people have had to stop and really, really think about what is the condition of this country. And it's taking a while for people to get there, but we're doing better. But there's a lot of things to fix. There's a lot of things to fix. Most importantly, the pandemic, which has gone completely out of control, and people are dying left, right, and center. And so my hope is that we'll be able to get enough. There's so many fires to put out.
Sure.
It's sort of like, where do we begin? We have white nationalists, we have a pandemic, we have unemployment, we have, take your pick. So I don't know where immigration policy will fall, at least in the next 4 years. Hopefully they'll have more than 4 years to fix these things, but also clean up all the other stuff that's been happening for the past 4 years, because the country's in a little bit of shambles right now. We're really in trouble. And there's a lot of cleanup to do.
Yeah, sure. Any Brazilian can get that.
I would have loved to be in Sao Paulo and Bahia and all of these places, actually presenting the film myself and being able to watch the audience watching the movie. But we went through 2020 and that wasn't possible. But of all the places, I think Brazil has had some of the more enthusiastic, just love and appreciation for the film in terms of private messages that have been sent to me. We had a wonderful outdoor screening, Cinema de Fachada, with Alicia Braga, right before our launch on MUBI. And so it was a live stream, and I got to see some of the comments on there and on Instagram and places like that, which has been really, really nice. I mean, it's also a demonstration of the new normal that we are sort of dealing with right now during the pandemic, where everything is online. So it's a little bit removed and unusual in terms of how we're able to interact right now. But it's been really sweet, and it's kind of a unexpected outcome from this film. I mean, my inspiration to become a filmmaker at all in general was because I grew up in a time and in a place on the African continent where there were no African films. There were no images of my people, of my stories, of my surroundings. All of our movies were imported. All of our programming was imported, other than the news, and there's plenty of imported news too, but we had some local news. And so I wanted to become a filmmaker so that I could see myself and that we could see ourselves. And so, that's been my main focus as a filmmaker, is to sort of reflect stories about us that are just about regular people, and just the beauty and the joys of us as people. And so to be able to get this kind of a reception from the Brazilian audience, where it felt like a lot of the feedback that I got was like, we see ourselves in this too. has been actually really wonderful and beautiful. A lot of it is because of language. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to do more with the Portuguese.
Oh, it's all right.
I don't speak Portuguese at all. And the little that we had, we worked with consultants, our choreographers, beautiful dancer from Angola, Manuel Kanza, who also doubled a little bit as he translated some of the lines that originally wrote in English. And we're thinking of places where we could have them say it in Portuguese and not put subtitles, because it was important for me for people to just understand, like we're a multicultural world, and you can tell what they're saying because of how they'll respond or whatever else happens. And so it's been amazing to get that kind of feedback from somewhere that I didn't expect, where people feel like they can see themselves. And I've gotten the same from India, from a bunch of places in Asia, where people are like, yes, this is my story. I can relate to this. I really feel that, and it's just like, oh, it's much wider than I had expected.
Muito legal a entrevista, né, pessoal? Eu gostaria de agradecer demais a Ekwa por essa entrevista exclusiva aqui para o Cineclube Mimese. E não se esqueçam de que o MUBI, onde você pode encontrar o Fevereiro, Meu Amor, ou vários outros filmes, lançamentos clássicos, restaurações, curtas, médias, longas, está com um plano exclusivo para estudantes. Você que é estudante de graduação ou pós-graduação vai ter acesso a esse catálogo maravilhoso do MUBI, com tanta coisa legal, tanta coisa interessante, vários lançamentos exclusivos por apenas R$16,90 por mês. Eu recomendo demais. A curadoria é muito, muito maravilhosa e um filme novo todos os dias, além do acervo que você pode conferir lá. Então, olha, tá muito bacana, muito interessante e por esse preço maravilhoso. E claro, não se esqueça de que agora em fevereiro de 2021 a gente vai sortear 1 ano grátis de MUBI. Então, se você tá inscrito aqui no Cineclube Mimese no YouTube e seguir a página MUBI Brasil no Instagram, está automaticamente concorrendo a 1 ano grátis de MUBI que a gente vai sortear agora em fevereiro, tá bom? Então, boa sorte a todos vocês e até!